Hello and welcome. Today we are going to a place and a time that has really become legendary in the world of unsolved mysteries.
It's one of those stories that once you hear it, it just doesn't leave you.
Exactly. We are heading to the northern Ural Mountains in what was then the Soviet Union. The year is 1959.
And it's deep winter. The setting itself is a major part of the story. It's incredibly harsh, remote, unforgiving.
We're talking about a story that starts with 9 experienced hikers on an ambitious expedition,
Yeah.
and it ends with a series of forensic puzzles that have baffled investigators and, really, the public for more than 60 years.
Right. This is, of course, the Dyatlov Pass incident.
The basic facts are just so stark. You have 9 people who, in the middle of the night, cut their way out of their tent from the inside.
From the inside, that's such a critical detail right from the start.
And they flee into the freezing wilderness, temperatures dropping to minus 40 degrees Celsius, which is also minus 40 Fahrenheit.
Just unimaginably cold. And they do this without proper clothing, without their boots. They run out into the snow in socks or even barefoot.
All 9 of them died. And when their bodies were found, the investigation uncovered injuries that just seemed impossible.
That's where the mystery really deepens. Some died from hypothermia, which is tragic but understandable. But others had, well, they had catastrophic internal injuries.
Skulls fractured, chests crushed.
And the forensic examiner at the time said the force required was comparable to a car crash. Yet, and this is the really strange part, there were no external signs of a fight. No significant soft tissue damage corresponding to those breaks.
It's a contradiction that opened the door to decades of speculation.
Absolutely, you've heard them all. Yetis, secret military weapons, aliens.
Right, the theories have run wild. But that's not what we're here to do. Our goal today is to trace the entire timeline of this event, sticking to the factual record.
We'll use the investigators' files, the hikers' own diaries and photos found at the scene, and crucially, the modern scientific analyses from the last few years that have finally provided the most plausible explanation to date.
We want to strip away all that sensationalism and really look at the chain of events, at the physics, the forensics, and the people themselves.
Because they weren't characters in a horror story. They were real, highly competent young people who were caught in a terrible situation. Approaching it with respect and a focus on the facts is, I think, the only way to do it justice.
So let's start by setting that scene properly. The Northern Urals, late January 1959. What kind of environment are we talking about?
We're talking about a vast, sparsely populated wilderness. The nearest town of any size is miles and miles away. It's taiga forest giving way to windswept, treeless mountains.
And to even want to go there, you have to understand the culture around this kind of activity in the Soviet Union at the time.
Yes, exactly. This wasn't tourism like we might think of it. It was a sport called sport tourism. It was about endurance, self-sufficiency, and pitting yourself against nature. It was highly organized and very prestigious.
And the group we're talking about, they were not casual weekend campers.
Not at all. This expedition was a serious undertaking. Its official purpose was a ski traverse across the northern Urals, and documents found later suggest it was named in honor of the 21st Congress of the Communist Party. Everything had that kind of formal weight to it.
And it was led by a young man named Igor Dyatlov.
Right, Igor Dyatlov. He was 23 years old, a radio engineering student at the Ural Polytechnical Institute. By all accounts, he was a natural leader, very experienced, very respected. He's the one who assembled the team.
Who else was in the group?
It was a group of 10 initially, and they were mostly fellow students and graduates of the same institute. You had Yuri Doroshenko, 21, Ludmila Dubinina, who was only 20, Georgy Krivonishenko, 23. He was often called Yuri as well.
Okay.
Then there was Alexander Kolevatov, 24, Zenaida Kolmogorova, 22, Rustam Slobodin, 23, and Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, also 23.
So a very young group, all in their early 20s.
Except for one, there was a slightly older member who joined the group a bit later in the planning.
Ah, right. Semyon Zolotaryov.
Yes. Semyon, or Alexander as he sometimes went by, Zolotaryov. He was 38, a ski instructor and a veteran of World War II. He brought a different kind of life experience to the group.
A combat veteran. That adds another layer of experience and, you'd think, resilience to the team.
It certainly does. So you have this mix of bright, athletic young students and this older, seasoned veteran. And their goal was incredibly ambitious.
They were planning to travel 300 kilometers, about 190 miles, on skis to reach a mountain called Mount Otorten.
And that specific distance, 300 kilometers, is key. In the Soviet system of sport tourism, there were different certifications. These were all experienced grade 2 hikers.
And this trip was their attempt to achieve the next level.
Precisely. If they completed this trek successfully, they would all be awarded grade 3 certification, which was the highest honor available at the time. It was a serious mark of distinction.
So the route itself was designed to be a major challenge.
Dyatlov designed it himself. For that time of year, February, it was rated as a Category 3 route, the most difficult. They were deliberately choosing the hardest conditions to prove their skill.
Let's talk for a moment about their equipment.
Uh-huh.
Because you have to put yourself in their shoes, and their gear was nothing like what we have today.
Oh, not even close. You can forget Gore-Tex or GPS. They were on heavy, wide wooden skis that you had to muscle through the deep snow.
And their clothing.
Natural fibers, wool sweaters, cotton parkas, canvas trousers. And the thing about cotton and wool is, once it gets wet, it loses its insulating properties, and it freezes solid. It becomes a liability.
So there was very little margin for error.
Very little. And the tent itself is a crucial piece of this story.
It wasn't just a standard tent they bought somewhere, right?
No, it was custom. Dyatlov and the group had actually sewn 2 smaller 4-person canvas tents together to create one long tube that could house the entire team. It was heavy, it was cumbersome, and it wasn't waterproof in any modern sense of the word.
And they had a stove.
A small, portable wood-burning stove that Dyatlov himself had helped design. This is another critical detail. The plan, on most nights, was to camp below the tree line so they could gather firewood to heat the tent and cook their meals.
Okay, so that's the team and their setup. They begin the journey in late January 1959.
Right. They take a train to a town called Ivdel, arriving on January 25th. From Ivdel, they get a truck to take them further north to a place called Vizai.
And Vizai is significant because
It was the last inhabited settlement. Beyond Vizai, there was nothing but wilderness. They spent the night there, and on January 27th, they set off on skis toward Mount Otorten.
But the group of 10 quickly became a group of 9.
Yes, on the very next day, January 28th, one of the members, Yuri Yudin, was forced to turn back. He'd been suffering from a number of health issues, including rheumatism, and the physical strain caused his joint pain to flare up severely.
He just couldn't continue.
He couldn't. It was a difficult decision for him. In that culture of endurance, turning back was hard. He said his goodbyes. He gave the group some of his extra warm gear because he wouldn't need it. He later said he felt like the weak link.
But that health problem ended up saving his life.
It did. He was the only one of the original 10 to survive the expedition. He lived into his 70s, haunted by what happened to his friends.
So the remaining 9 press on. And we have a good idea of their final days because of what the search party found later.
That's right. The investigators recovered diaries and several rolls of film from the cameras found at the last campsite, so we can piece together their progress with a good degree of certainty.
What do those diaries and photos tell us?
They show the group in good spirits. They're smiling, working together. The entries describe the typical challenges of a winter trek, the deep snow, the cold, but there's no sense of doom or interpersonal conflict.
So on January 31st, they reach the edge of the highlands. They're preparing for the main ascent.
Exactly. They're in a wooded valley near the Ospia River. And here they make a crucial decision. They build a small storage platform, a cache, for some of their surplus food and equipment.
Why do that?
The plan was to travel light for the final push over the mountains. They would pick up these supplies on their return journey. It's a standard practice for this kind of expedition.
It also tells us they fully intended to come back that same way.
Without a doubt. So the next day, February 1st, they leave the cache behind and start to move up and through the pass. Their goal was likely to cross the pass and then descend on the other side to make camp in another forested area.
But something went wrong.
The weather turned. The diary entries and photos from that last day showed deteriorating conditions. Snowstorms, high winds, and very low visibility. A whiteout.
And they made a navigational error.
They did. Because of the poor visibility, they lost their intended line and deviated to the west. Instead of going through the pass, they ended up climbing onto the slope of a nearby mountain.
A mountain called Kholat Syakhl.
Yes. In the language of the local Mansi people, the name is sometimes translated as Dead Mountain, which of course adds to the mystique of the story. Though some linguists say a more accurate translation might be Meager Mountain, referring to the lack of game there.
So they realized their mistake.
Yeah.
They're on the side of this mountain, not through the pass where they wanted to be. What were their options?
Well, they had a clear choice. They could have retreated. About 1.5 kilometers, less than a mile, downhill from their position was the tree line, a forest.
Which would have provided shelter from the wind.
Shelter and, crucially, firewood for their stove.
But they didn't do that.
No. For some reason, Igor Dyatlov made the decision to set up camp right there on the exposed, windswept slope of the mountain.
Why? Why would an experienced leader make that choice?
We can only speculate. Yuri Yudin, the survivor, later suggested two possibilities. One, Dyatlov may not have wanted to lose the altitude they had just worked so hard to gain. They would just have to climb it all again the next day.
Okay, that makes some sense.
The other idea is that he might have decided it was a good opportunity to practice making camp in difficult high-altitude conditions, a training exercise.
Whatever the reason, that decision had a major consequence for their night.
A huge one. By camping above the tree line, they had no access to wood. This meant they could not use their stove. They were forced to make a cold camp.
So they would be eating cold rations and trying to sleep in a canvas tent with no heat source, in temperatures that were plummeting to minus 30 or 40 degrees.
Yes. They were already cold, tired, and likely damp from the day's trek when they got into their sleeping bags. That's the state they were in when they pitched their tent for the last time.
So that brings us to the night of the incident, February 1st into the 2nd. Before they left, Dyatlov had made an arrangement to signal that they were safe.
He did. He was supposed to send a telegram to their sports club from Vizhai when they finished the route. The estimated date for that was February 12th.
But he also told Yudin it could take longer.
Right. So when February 12th came and went with no word, nobody panicked immediately. Delays on these kinds of treks were common. Weather could hold you up for days.
But eventually, the family started to worry.
By February 20th, with still no news, the families demanded a search and rescue operation be launched. The Institute organized the first groups, made up of volunteer students and teachers.
And soon after, the official authorities got involved.
Yes, the army and the police joined the search, bringing in planes and helicopters to survey the vast area.
It took them almost a week. Then, on February 26th, they found something.
The student who found it, Mikhail Sherevin, saw it from a distance. It was the tent.
And the condition of the tent was the first sign that this was not a typical case of hikers getting lost.
Not at all. He described it as collapsed, half-torn, and almost completely covered in snow. It was clearly abandoned.
And when they got closer, they found that all of the group's belongings were still inside. Their backpacks, their spare clothes, their food.
And their shoes. All their boots were lined up neatly inside the tent. They also found some meat and crackers that had been sliced and laid out, which suggests that whatever happened, it happened suddenly, either during or just after their evening meal.
But the most significant detail was how they had gotten out of the tent.
The entrance flap was still tied shut. The investigators found that the tent had been slashed and cut open with a knife.
And the analysis later confirmed
Definitively that the cuts were made from the inside.
So the hikers themselves cut their way out. That speaks to an incredible urgency, a panic.
It suggests they felt they had to get out of that tent immediately, that they didn't even have the few seconds it would take to untie the entrance. They just slashed their way out and ran.
And they ran into the blizzard without their boots. The searchers found tracks leading away from the tent.
Yes, 9 sets of footprints. And the forensic analysis of these tracks was chilling. It showed people wearing only socks or a single shoe, or in some cases, completely barefoot.
Barefoot in that snow.
It's almost impossible to comprehend. The tracks led down the slope, away from the tent, heading northeast towards the tree line about a mile away.
And the tracks told a story, didn't they?
Yeah.
It wasn't a complete, chaotic scatter.
No. After an initial jumble near the tent, the tracks showed that the group moved down the hill in a relatively orderly fashion. They were walking or moving briskly, but they weren't sprinting away from each other. They were moving as a group. After about 500 meters, the tracks disappeared, covered by windblown snow.
So the search party followed that line towards the forest.
They did, and at the edge of the forest, under a large solitary Siberian pine, it's often called a cedar in the reports, they found the next piece of the scene.
The remains of a fire.
A small fire, yes. And next to it, the first 2 bodies.
Yuri Krivonyshenko and Yuri Doroshenko.
That's right. They were found lying side by side. They were shoeless and dressed only in their underwear.
Just their underwear.
Yes. The branches on the big pine tree above them were broken up to a height of 5 meters. The clear implication is that someone had frantically climbed the tree.
To do what? To look for something.
That's the logical assumption. Perhaps to try and spot the tent again, or to see if they were being followed, or just to get a lay of the land.
So we have 2 members of the group who made it to the relative shelter of the trees, started a fire, but still froze to death.
Correct. The search continued, fanning out from that spot. The next 3 bodies were found on the slope, in the open, between the cedar tree and the camp.
These were Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin.
Yes, and their positions were significant. Dyatlov was found about 300 meters from the cedar, Kolmogorova about 480 meters, and Slobodin at 630 meters.
And their body language, their positioning, suggested they were?
That they were all trying to crawl back up the hill, back towards the tent.
So the picture emerging is the group flees to the trees, 2 die there, and then 3 others make a desperate attempt to get back to the tent for gear, for shelter.
And they succumbed to the cold on the way. That was the theory. A legal inquest was started right away, and for these first 5 bodies, the cause of death seems straightforward.
Hypothermia.
Overwhelmingly, yes. The medical examiner concluded they had all frozen to death. Slobodin was found to have a small, non-lethal fracture in his skull, but it wasn't considered the cause of his death.
So at this point, it's a terrible tragedy, but it seems to have a logical, if grim, explanation. They were caught in the cold and made a series of fatal errors.
That's how it appeared, but 4 of the hikers were still missing.
And the search for them went on for months.
It did. The winter snows were incredibly deep. It wasn't until May 4th, more than 2 months later, that the remaining 4 were found.
Where were they?
A search party probing the snow with long poles found them buried under 4 meters, that's about 13 feet, of snow in a ravine about 75 meters further into the woods from that first cedar tree.
And the discovery of these 4 bodies is what turned this from a tragedy into one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century.
It changed everything, because the autopsy findings for this second group were nothing like the first.
Let's go through them. This is where the story takes a very dark turn.
The 3 who were found to have died from traumatic injuries were Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, Lyudmila Dubinina, and Semyon Zolotaryov. The 4th, Alexander Kolovatov, died of hypothermia.
What were the injuries?
Thibault-Brignoles had suffered a major skull fracture. It was extensive. But Dubinina and Zolotaryov, they both had massive chest trauma. Multiple ribs on both sides were fractured.
And the forensic expert at the time, a Dr. Boris Fozrojdeny, made that now famous comparison.
He did. He stated that the force required to cause such damage was immense. He compared it directly to the force of a high-speed car crash or the shock wave from an explosion.
But, and this is the core of the whole puzzle, these internal injuries had no corresponding external wounds.
None. There were no bruises on their chests, no cuts, no scrapes. It wasn't as if they'd been beaten with a rock or an axe. The soft tissue was intact. It was as if they'd been squeezed by an incredible, overwhelming pressure.
How is that even possible? To have your ribs crushed but no marks on your skin?
Think of it like this. If you're hit by something hard and fast, like a fist or a weapon, it causes localized external damage, a bruise, a cut. But if a massive, slow, and somewhat yielding force is applied over a large area, like being crushed by a huge weight, the internal structures can fail before the skin breaks.
It's a very specific type of injury.
Very. And it completely baffled the investigators. There was nothing in the environment that seemed to account for it.
Then there were the other disturbing details about the bodies found in the ravine, the soft tissue damage.
Yes. This is often where the more sensational theories get their fuel. Lyudmila Dubinina was found to be missing her tongue, her eyes, parts of her lips, and some facial tissue.
And Semyon Zolotaryov was missing his eyeballs, Alexander Kolovatov his eyebrows.
Correct. And on the surface, this sounds like something out of a horror film, like evidence of torture. But the forensic expert had a much more mundane, though still grim, explanation. Putrefaction. Decomposition. The bodies had been lying in a ravine, in a small, running stream of water, for 3 months. Dr. Vozrozdeny concluded that this damage happened post-mortem.
After they had already died.
Yes. Scavengers, small animals like shrews or mice and microorganisms, would have targeted the softest, most accessible tissues first. The environment of the wet ravine accelerated this process. It was a natural, though gruesome, result of where they were found.
That's a vital point. The missing tongue was likely not an act of violence, but an act of nature.
The medical examiner was clear on that. But the crush injuries? Those were the cause of death for those 3, along with hypothermia. They happened while they were still alive.
So with all this confusing and contradictory evidence, what did the original 1959 investigation conclude?
They concluded very little, really. The official finding, issued in May 1959, was that the group members had died as a result of a compelling natural force.
A compelling natural force. What does that even mean?
It's incredibly vague. It essentially means they didn't know what happened, but they were sure it wasn't murder. Since there was no perpetrator to prosecute, the case was closed.
And the files were classified.
The files were sent to a secret archive, which only fueled speculation of a cover-up for decades to come.
On top of that, there were other strange details that came out of the investigation, things that didn't fit any simple explanation.
One of the most talked about is the discovery of radiation. Low levels of radioactivity were detected on some of the hikers' clothing.
Right, and then there were the reports about the unusual color of the body's skin.
Descriptions of a deep brown or orange tan, yes. That detail is actually less mysterious than it sounds. It's a known phenomenon of bodies exposed to extreme cold and wind for a long time. It's a form of mummification.
Okay, so that can be explained. What about the radiation?
That's more complex. The levels were low. Some of the hikers, including Dyatlov, worked in places or studied subjects related to nuclear technology, which was booming in the Urals at the time. The contamination could have come from their jobs. It could also have been atmospheric fallout from nuclear tests elsewhere. It was isolated to a few items of clothing, not the entire scene, which argues against a single radioactive event like a weapon blast.
Another anomaly that came to light later was the report of strange lights in the sky.
Yes, this came from another group of hikers who were camped about 50 kilometers south of Dyatlov's group. They reported seeing strange, glowing orange spheres in the sky to the north on the night of the incident.
And it wasn't just them.
No, similar sightings were reported by meteorologists and even the military throughout February and March of that year in the same region.
The lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, he later said he was pressured about this, didn't he?
He did. Decades later, in 1990, he wrote an article claiming that high-ranking regional officials had ordered him to drop that line of inquiry and classify any reports about flying spheres.
Which, of course, sounds like the confirmation of a massive cover-up.
It certainly adds to that narrative. So you have this perfect storm for conspiracy theories, a vague official conclusion, classified files, and these strange details about radiation and unidentified lights.
So let's go through some of the main theories that have developed over the years and see how they hold up against the evidence.
We can use a process of elimination. The first and most obvious suspect, at least to the initial searchers, was human foul play.
An attack by the local Mansi people, for example. The idea that the hikers were trespassing on sacred land.
Right. But that was ruled out very quickly. The Mansi were known to be peaceful, and they cooperated fully with the investigation. But more importantly, the physical evidence at the scene just doesn't support it.
No extra footprints.
None. Only the 9 hikers' tracks were found. There was no sign of a struggle at the tent. And most conclusively, the injuries, the massive internal trauma without external wounds, are simply not something a human being could inflict with their bare hands or a simple weapon.
Okay, so a human attack is out. What about the idea of paradoxical undressing?
This is a real medical phenomenon associated with severe hypothermia. As the body is freezing, the hypothalamus, which regulates temperature, malfunctions. It can cause a sudden, intense sensation of being hot.
Leading victims to irrationally strip off their clothes, which just speeds up their death.
Exactly. And since 6 of the 9 hikers officially died of hypothermia, it seems like a very plausible explanation for why Krivonashenko and Doroshenko were found in their underwear.
But it doesn't explain everything.
It doesn't. The group found in the ravine was actually better dressed, and there's clear evidence they were thinking rationally enough to try and survive. For example, Dubinina's foot was wrapped in a piece of Krivonashenko's torn trousers. They were scavenging clothing from their dead friends to stay warm. That's a sign of desperation, but not irrationality.
It argues against a mass simultaneous panic.
It does. They were fighting to live.
Okay, what about purely natural environmental theories? There was one about katabatic winds.
Yes, a 2019 Swedish-Russian expedition explored this. Katabatic winds are extremely powerful, sudden gusts of cold, dense air that can come rushing down a mountainside. The theory is that a wind like this could have made the tent start to shred or seem like it was about to be blown away, forcing them to evacuate.
And the injuries.
That theory suggests they built a snow shelter in the ravine to escape the wind, and that shelter later collapsed on top of them, causing the crush injuries. It's a possibility.
A related theory involves something called infrasound.
Right. This was popularized in the book Dead Mountain. The idea is that the unique geography of Kolatschakal, combined with the strong winds, could have created something called a Kármán vortex street, a repeating pattern of swirling air vortices. And this pattern can, theoretically, generate infrasound sound waves at a frequency too low for humans to hear, but that you can feel.
And what does infrasound do to a person?
Studies suggest it can cause feelings of intense anxiety, panic, dread, and physical discomfort. The theory is that this sound drove them into an irrational panic, causing them to cut their way out of the tent and flee. The injuries then came from them accidentally falling into the ravine in the dark.
It's a fascinating idea, but it's very hard to prove.
It is. It accounts for the flight, but it's less convincing on the specific nature of those crush injuries.
Which brings us to the military test theories. This is where the orange spheres come in.
Exactly. The idea is that the hikers accidentally wandered into a secret military testing zone. The orange spheres were some kind of aircraft, or maybe flares, or even the glow from a weapon being detonated.
Some have suggested something like a parachute mine.
Yes, a weapon that detonates in midair. The shockwave, the concussion, could cause devastating internal injuries without leaving shrapnel or an impact crater. It seems to fit the injuries perfectly.
But what's the evidence for it?
That's the problem. There is none. No military debris, no shrapnel, no crater was ever found. The radiation, as we discussed, was low level and can be explained in other ways. So while it's a compelling narrative, especially with the investigators' claims of a cover-up, there's no physical proof at the scene.
So all these theories have pieces that fit, but none of them explains everything perfectly.
For 60 years, that's where things stood, a collection of incomplete explanations.
Until very recently. In 2019, the Russian Prosecutor General's office reopened the case.
They did, largely to try and put an end to the endless conspiracy theories. They announced they would only consider theories involving natural phenomena.
They looked at a hurricane, a standard avalanche.
And in 2020, they announced their conclusion that the group had died as a result of an avalanche.
But the avalanche theory always had major problems, didn't it? That's why it was dismissed back in 1959.
It had huge problems. For one, the slope where they camped wasn't that steep, less than 30 degrees, not typically considered prime avalanche territory.
And the searchers who found the tent didn't report seeing any signs of a recent avalanche. No big debris field.
Right. And the tent itself was still partially standing. Their skis, stuck in the snow nearby, were also upright. A big, powerful avalanche would have swept everything away. It just didn't add up.
So how can the answer be an avalanche if it doesn't look like an avalanche?
This is where the real breakthrough comes from. A scientific study published in 2021 by two researchers, Johann Gaume and Alexander Puzrin from Swiss universities.
And they proposed a very specific and very different kind of avalanche.
A small, delayed slab avalanche.
Okay, break that down. What is a slab avalanche and why is it different?
A normal avalanche is often a slide of loose snow. A slab avalanche is when a cohesive, hardened block of snow breaks off and slides. The researchers used advanced computer models, including animation code from the movie Frozen, to simulate the conditions on that slope that night.
And what did they find?
They identified a unique combination of factors. First, the hikers themselves set the stage. To pitch their tent and protect it from the wind, they dug into the snowpack on the slope.
This cut destabilized the snow above them.
It created a weak point, but nothing happened right away. This is the delayed part. That night, strong katabatic winds were blowing down the mountain, just as the hikers' diaries described.
And these winds were dumping more snow onto the slope above the tent,
piling up weight onto that already weakened area. At the same time, the extreme cold was causing a process called sintering in the snowpack, where the ice crystals were bonding together, making the slab above them harder and more rigid.
So they created a weak spot, and then the wind and cold loaded the trigger.
Precisely. The researchers' model showed that several hours after the hikers had gone to sleep, the accumulated weight and the brittleness of the slab reached a breaking point. A block of snow, maybe about 5 meters long, cracked and slid down the slope.
Not a massive mountain-clearing avalanche, just one solid block.
Yes. A relatively small slide. It didn't have enough power to sweep the tent away, but it had enough mass and rigidity to crash down onto the middle of it where the hikers were sleeping.
And this explains the injuries.
It explains them perfectly. The model showed that a heavy, solid slab of snow slamming down on sleeping bodies that are lying on a hard floor, remember, their skis were likely under the tent floor for insulation, could generate the exact kind of force needed to cause those specific chest and skull fractures.
A car crash force.
Exactly. And because the force is distributed through the soft canvas of the tent and the snow itself, it explains the lack of external soft tissue damage. They were crushed, not struck.
This seems to connect all the dots.
It's the first theory that accounts for almost every piece of physical evidence at the scene.
So let's reconstruct that night based on this slab avalanche model. What is the most likely sequence of events?
Okay. Sometime in the middle of the night, while they're all asleep, the slab releases. It hits the tent. It's dark, it's sudden, it's violent. Some of the hikers, likely the ones in the middle, are immediately and severely injured.
The tent is partially collapsed. The main entrance is blocked by the snow.
And they are terrified. They don't know if this is just a small slide or the start of a massive avalanche that's about to bury them completely. Survival instinct kicks in.
They have to get out now.
So they grab a knife and they slash their way out of the fabric. They scramble out into the blizzard, underdressed, injured, in total shock.
Their first thought is to get away from the slope, which they see as a danger zone.
Right. They can't stay there. They believe a bigger slide might be coming. They have to get to safer ground, which is the tree line, 1.5 kilometers away.
And they help their injured friends. This explains why they move together as a group. It's an evacuation, not a panic flight.
A desperate but organized retreat. They make it to the cedar tree. They manage to start a fire. But the conditions are just too extreme. Krivonyshenko and Doroshenko, who are the most lightly dressed, succumb to hypothermia first.
At this point, the remaining group faces another terrible choice.
They realize the bigger avalanche isn't coming. Their only hope is the gear back in the tent. So 3 of them, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin, make a heroic but futile attempt to get back up the slope.
And they freeze to death trying to save the group.
Yes. That leaves the last 4, who are likely the most severely injured from the initial impact. They can't make it back up the hill. They move deeper into the woods, into the ravine, for better shelter.
They try to dig a snow den.
It seems so. They were found with clothes taken from their dead comrades. They were fighting to the very end, but their injuries were too severe, the cold too intense, and perhaps the roof of their snow den collapsed, or another pocket of snow in the ravine shifted, delivering the final crushing blow.
And after they die, nature takes its course over the next 3 months, explaining the final state of the bodies.
Exactly. It's a complete, logical, and scientifically grounded chain of events.
So it wasn't a monster or a secret weapon.
Yeah.
It was a tragic convergence of circumstances.
A perfect storm. Their decision to camp on that slope, the way they cut into the snow, the specific wind and temperature conditions that night, it all combined to create a rare, deadly natural phenomenon.
This explanation, it completely reframes the actions of the hikers.
It does. They weren't irrational. They weren't victims of some paranormal event. They were courageous. They faced an impossible situation with incredible bravery. They executed a textbook evacuation under the worst conditions imaginable, and they fought for each other's lives until they had nothing left.
It's a story of human endurance then, not of supernatural horror.
I think that's the most powerful takeaway. The mystery has been solved not by finding a monster, but by understanding the physics of snow and respecting the competence of the people who were lost.
The pass where they died is now officially named Dyatlov Pass in their memory, and a memorial stands there.
A testament to 9 young, capable people who were simply overcome by what that first investigator so aptly, if vaguely, called a compelling natural force. We just finally understand what that force was.
It is an incredible story. And having a scientific explanation that honors their struggle feels like a fitting, if somber, final chapter.
It does. It brings a sense of resolution to a tragedy that has been clouded by speculation for far too long.
And perhaps the final thought to leave you with is how a single decision, a single navigational error of just a few hundred meters, can set in motion a chain of events with such devastating consequences. The smallest margins can make all the difference.
A humbling reminder of our vulnerability in the face of the natural world.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.